stay engaged in the space and make sure that you share what's working and what doesn't work. And also remember, not all businesses are SaaS based. So a lot of the practices that you'll see in the space are very much SaaS based ideas or best practices. And of course, not all businesses are like that.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Chandni, and we're really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and tech experts from all around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Engati is the world's leading multilingual, no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 4 lakh visitors annually. And now for our guest. As a Vice President of Customer Success, Lauren Costella brings extensive experience to her role. She's a change agent, a communicator, a leader, and a passionate champion for customer success in business, and holds numerous senior management and directorial positions at global SaaS companies such as Searchmetrics and BrightEdge. She also serves as a board member for the Customer Success Network, a thought leader and speaker in the customer success space, and publishes articles and information on her blog. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lauren.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to talk about CS and
That's
everything that has to do with customers.
that's great. But before we dive into our interview with Lauren, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap on the bell icon below to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders around the globe. So, beginning with the interview, Lauren, my first question to you is, how important is understanding the customer journey, and how can we build customer loyalty through feedback?
These are really great questions. And first and foremost, understanding the customer journey is absolutely imperative for business success. And the way I think about understanding the customer journey is actually part of an overall growth model. It's not my growth model. It was created by McKinsey. It's called the 2.0 growth model for customer success. The customer journey is one part of that growth model. So it is an imperative part, but it's certainly not the only part. And then understanding the journey, understanding where those things, where you engage with your customers, where you get feedback, incredibly important because there's a real financial impact to your bottom line as a business. So the cost of keeping a customer, we know, is far less than acquiring a new one. And so alone, just keeping your customers and making sure you're listening to their feedback, you're creating advocates, is going to help your bottom line. In addition to that, if we can help customers improve their bottom line because they're getting value out of our products or our services, means that we're helping them acquire more customers or helping their bottom line, which means they will be able to come back and appreciate what we were able to provide for them. And in some cases, we will to provide more value as we grow with them. So again, it's really important to understand your customer journey as part of your overall growth as a company, and it's one piece to the growth model puzzle. In addition, you asked about customer loyalty through feedback. So the way I think about feedback, first and foremost, you have to set up feedback loops. So you need to think about those feedback points being maybe within the product, within the journey points themselves. In other words, the parts where you interact with your customer through your services, etc. And you need to listen to the feedback. So in order to build loyalty, you actually do have to listen to feedback from your customers and action that feedback. So this could be anything from feedback about your pricing model to your product and usability to the types of services you offer. Everything needs to be heard. Not everything needs to be actioned. And that's okay. but you want to make sure you have that 80-20 rule. What are the things that you can action that'll help 80% of those customers to be more successful? So that's how I think about feedback. And I think it's imperative to collect it and make sure your customers actually had their voice heard, if not necessarily always actioned on.
Absolutely. And I totally agree to the part where you said that it's important to collect feedback and act upon it rather than just collecting feedback, because listening to what the customers want is really, really important. And doing it the way they like it is something that could help change the whole CX scenario. That's absolutely well said, Lauren. So, moving on to my next question, what are the few things to be kept in mind while developing a customer success strategy?
Also, a really great question. So, the way I think of a customer success strategy first is you need to figure out what's the outcome of your customer success strategy. In other words, what do you think is successful with this strategy? Is success just retaining your customers? Is your business looking to retain and grow your customers? Is your business looking to retain, grow, and create advocates that maybe drive brand new business? So to me, you really have to decide and figure out what does that success look like for your business. And you also have to think about what success looks like, of course, for your customers. Now, once you start to figure out, okay, where do you want to be? A lot of people like to say, oh my gosh, well, I want retention, growth, and advocacy. Then you actually have to think about, okay, how do I get there and where do we stand today? And that's how you start thinking about building your strategy. So first and foremost, I like to use the framework of the CS 2.0 growth model developed by McKinsey. I mentioned that just before. This growth model, you can read about it online. It was written in 2018, in January of 2018, and it talks about 5 elements for a growth engine, because that's truly how I do think of CS, is it can really help your business be a growth engine. Now, I think about being a growth engine while taking the customer needs into account. But this is just the model in order to set up that strategy. So this model has 5 elements: unified go-to-market strategy, a sustainable funding model, a CS talent engine, advanced analytics, and then a customer success philosophy built throughout your business, which is essentially your customer journey. With those 5 elements, you want to analyze how you are doing. So if you read about those elements, you want to analyze your business about how connected are you on all of those elements, not only within your business, but with customers. And as I mentioned before, one piece to that model is the customer journey. That's your journey points, that's your segmentation, that's your interaction with customers. But there's so many other elements that can actually affect whether or not you're successful in delivering that journey. For example, if you don't have a talent engine, a CS talent engine, and all of your CSMs or all of your support team are churning out and you don't have really good people, you can't possibly engage with your customers in a really great way. Or let's say, for example, you're not aligned with the go-to-market teams, your marketing and sales teams about pricing and packaging or the messaging, the way they're selling and what you actually have as a product. You will never be successful in terms of being able to build out that journey. So the first things that you need to keep in mind with a success strategy is, what does success look like for your business? Is it retention only, growth, and advocacy? Then it's analyzing yourself against that 2.0 business model. At least that's what I do. And then it's about building your roadmap based on what are the things we need to tackle first to essentially get the biggest bang for our buck. What are the things that are most need that can really turn the needle to turn that customer experience into a green experience or into an experience that enhances our ability to achieve those end goals. So that's how I think about that strategy. Those are the ways I start to sequence it out. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, and that's really well put out. I mean, the steps and the way you sorted it out for all of us, I think the audience is going to really, really find this helpful. So, moving on to our next question, what are the steps for a smoother customer escalation, and how can we build a customer engagement model?
Yeah, this is also a great question, because a lot of times when we're working with customers, escalations is just part of the nature of the game. In some ways, I never like to look at escalations as a bad thing, because it actually points out where there's probably flaws in either your people, your process, or your technology. When I think about smooth escalation in general and trying to make sure that you really try to address some of those issues that pop up, the first thing that comes to mind for me is communication. You have to understand what kind of escalations you have. You need to make sure that you have the right processes and technology and people in place to address those. And it's all about communicating with your customer, right? So whether you find out that you have, hey, performance issues that leads to escalations, or platform goes down related issues, or relationship issues, or usability issues, or pricing issues, all of that comes out of engaging with your customers, but it also comes out of making sure that your customers hear back from you. Someone raises something, they need to hear back what's going on, what's the root cause, what are you as the vendor doing to fix it, and how will they know that it's been fixed, or how will they be engaged with afterwards? So the way I think about it is always you need to provide really excellent communication about why, what, who, and how things are going to get done. And I think if you provide that to customers on a regular basis, you will smooth out those escalations, and you want to make sure things are in place so those escalations aren't always going to say one point of failure. For example, if every escalation always came to me, there's only so much things that I am going to be able to tackle in a day to be able to help customers do what they need to do to be successful. So it's really important to make sure that we have de-escalation functions. And if I had to name one thing that you could look at today, it would be, how do you communicate with your customers? Do you address what's going on? Do you send them a communication right back to say not only you're looking into it, but when they'll hear back from you? Oftentimes escalations occur because customers don't have enough information. And with setting some expectations, you can very much de-escalate those things that maybe come to your plate.
Absolutely. And I love the way you put up communication as the first point, because I think that is something very basic, and that is where the essence lies. If you have like a good communication between you and the customer, I think everything else goes really smooth. So that's really, really great. Uh, the next question: how can customer success drive customer retention, and what can we do to avoid churn? And what if there is an organization that hasn't taken customer success on priority? So how do they go about this?
Yeah, so all very multifaceted questions, but I love them. So, first and foremost, driving retention. First, you need to understand, and we talked a little bit about this before, but feedback. You have to understand why customers leave before you can really understand why they are instead, like, or understand why customers are leaving in order to maybe address some of those churn elements. Now, understand sometimes customers churn because they're no longer the right fit for your product. But again, you have to understand why customers are churning, and in order to even begin to address some of the ways that you could prevent churn in the future. Um, Generally, customers, in my experience, really need to see that your solution provides them ROI. Does it make their company better? Does it make their bottom line better? No matter what space that they're in. So, for example, here at Good Time, we work with a lot of talent acquisition departments and managers, and it's all about driving the right people in the right seats to help their business be successful. If we're not helping our customers acquire that diverse talent faster and with better quality, then we're not going to help our customers achieve their bottom line, because their people are what drives their bottom line. So that's how we tie back to ROI, both from the speed and the quality of hire, and of course the diversity of hire, which really matters for their bottom line. They need a diverse populace of people helping their business. So you need to be able to show that ROI. And if you can do that and show that growth, that's when I think you really provide true business value, and that prevents a lot of churn. There are tons of other reasons that you could see churn happening as well. And again, this comes back down to communication. Are you connected into the business in a way to not only communicate ROI, but you're communicating that ROI to the right people? Sometimes if you only have your day-to-day contacts, you're never going to be able to acquire the right budget to free up your solution as the solution to use. Sometimes higher up people in the organization that own the budget don't understand why they should use your tool versus someone else. So really important to make sure that you have relationships and connections and you're showcasing that ROI to the people who actually own the budget, even if they're not the day-to-day users. And then one of the things that I really think that you can't expect is that you will avoid all churn. I mentioned this before, but you really can't avoid all churn. There are just some things that are unavoidable. So I really like to divide churn into controllable and unavoidable churn. So unavoidable churn are things like companies go out of business. There's things like, hey, this company got acquired and it's going to require a whole new business cycle to go in and to resell this customer. And depending on how your product or teams or things are set up, it may or may not be that best fit. Now, I think some leaders would argue that acquisitions is controllable. In my experience, I think it's a mix of both. You have to really have good processes, and sometimes the new acquiring company isn't ready for your solution yet. So it is really important not to push our agenda, but really to understand the customers. But suffice it to say, there are buckets of churn, controllable and uncontrollable churn. And you really need to talk with customers, interview them, ask customers who have churned, why do they leave? So you can understand the things to do to prevent it. And I think the most important thing to make sure you avoid churn is to have as many early warning signals as possible. So I talked a little bit about those feedback loops. We want to make sure that we understand early warning indicators throughout that customer journey, right? So everything from once I finish onboarding, how is that customer doing? Are they attaining that first value or not? If they're not, that probably is an early warning signal that this relationship isn't going well. We need to get things back on track. Throughout the customer journey, are you getting feedback from your customers about adoption? Are you getting feedback from them about the ROI they're earning throughout their time with you? And then finally, towards the end, when you're going into that renewal, you should know whether or not a customer is going to stay or work with you. So these early warning indicators, whether it's sentiment, usage, relationships, are all important as part of building that journey and getting things on track. And so that's a little bit of ways we talk about avoiding churn. For companies that maybe haven't implemented a solution in organizations, the advice that I would give you is you can always learn from your customers. There's nothing preventing you systematically today from taking a couple of customers and asking them what's going on. And I think that if you have a good loop of feedback from interviews, I would say that you'd be in a really great place to start thinking about, okay, is this applicable across all of my customers, or is this just a portion of customers, and how important is that portion of customers to my bottom line as a business? So if there's only a cohort that, let's say, is 3% of your business versus a cohort that's 90% of your business, you might want to take the feedback from the cohort that's 90% of your business and start figuring out how you can start actioning that. And I think that you can talk to a customer at any point. So talk to your customers after onboarding, talk to them during the journey, and talk to them at the end. And even without a systematic technology in place, you can still take those actions and start documenting it down.
Absolutely. And talking to the customers is really, really important to understand what they come from, what they want, and that is what you've put up really, really well out there for us. So, moving on to the next question, what are some of the key customer success insights that drive SaaS-based companies' growth?
A wonderful question. And I'm going to point back to that CS 2.0 growth model. And for me, when I think about what really drives CS growth, it's first your team's health. So by that, I mean, if you don't have people on your team who are staying happy, motivated, you will never be able to really drive your customer journey or anything else that your customers need. And this was just so apparent to me in joining any company that I've ever been a part of. Customers feel that pain when your CSM turns over, or they feel the pain when, there's not enough people in support. They feel the pain when there aren't people who are actively helping them or building the technology, I guess, to actively help them too. If you think about low touch and tech touch models, you need specialized CSMs to work and to build out the processes, build out the technology to support customers in that way. But if you don't have a healthy team of people who want to stay with your organization and build out those journeys and really work with customers in that way to understand what to build out, you're never going to be able to create healthy customers. So start internally with your team. The next thing that I think is really important is you have to talk and communicate with your customers. I can't say that enough. For me, one of the most important things that I learned even in joining Good Time was that we had a pricing and packaging issue. It wasn't because our customers didn't find value in our product. They did not understand how we were charging for that. And it created a lot of confusion. It created confusion going into the budget holders. We'd have a lot of issues trying to get the budget holders on board, and yet the users were having incredible success. And it just didn't align with how people thought about the space and what they were willing to open up their budget purse strings for. So we had to create an initiative across the company to fix that. And so a couple quarters later, we analyzed the market, we analyzed what we were doing, we put together a plan and a strategy to roll out another pricing model. And that's been incredibly helpful. So you really need to understand for your customers what works and what doesn't. And with regard to that pricing model, by the way, in the 2.0 McKinsey model, that's the alignment in the go-to-market strategy. So our marketing and sales team were selling something that customers didn't really understand, especially going into renewal, and then were shocked at the price tag that came with it. And so those are things that we have to always get that feedback from customers, but we also have to build the feedback loop within our organizations to make sure that gets to the right people and we can actually action it, especially if it's impacting a huge majority of your customers. And then my third insight would be, you really need to understand where you're weak and strong within that growth model in order to start actioning the right things at the right time. You will have a myriad of things that you could work on at any given point. The question is what should you be working on and what's going to be the biggest impact to both your customers and your bottom line? So if you take that growth model and you start analyzing, am I aligned on my go-to-market? Am I aligned on having a sustainable funding model? In other words, do I have essentially free or included services like support? Do I have advanced services that are helping to cover costs? Those are things you need to look at: aligned go-to-market, sustainable funding model, a healthy team, advanced analytics. Are you looking at churn earlier than just when it's actually happening, or do you have early warning indicators? And finally, do you have that journey built out? If you analyze your business and your customers across all 5 of those areas, you can really start to understand where you're weak and where you're strong. And then what you need to do is figure out, in those areas that I'm weak, by fixing it, will it help my customers now, in the future? How important is it? And when should we start actioning it? When you start to analyze your business in that way, and you start working with other teams, this is how you can start to build out your roadmap over the next 2, 3, 5 years to figure out, where am I going to be? And you'll have to constantly reevaluate how you're doing against this model. It's not a one and done activity because your business is going to constantly grow and change. As you bring on new customers, people, processes, and technology will break down. And so then you'll need to reassess, okay, in each of these 5 areas, what people do I need? What processes do I need? What technology do I need? And how does that change and grow over time as our organization changes and grows? So that's what I would say. Key insights would be team really understanding your customers and evaluating them against that 2.0 model, as well as understanding your internal business against that 2.0 model and building those roadmap items out so you know what to action and when, and not trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Absolutely, that's really, really insightful. So, before we wrap up the interview, Lauren, are there any other thoughts that you would like to share with our audience?
Oh gosh, there's so many thoughts because I've absolutely love this space, but I guess I would say that customer success, while it's simple in concept, it's not always easy to execute. And everyone is going to have a slightly different model or approach or way. So, my advice to the audience is continue to engage in the space. Make sure that you are talking about what has worked, but also what hasn't, so people learn and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. For example, I talked about the McKinsey 2.0 model a lot because I don't see the point in reinventing the wheel if we already have a model that's been assessed by professionals across various businesses. And this is some good advice. I have definitely adjusted some of the ways that I go about thinking about that model, but it's been great for the most part in terms of aligning my strategy to what helps the business grow. So my advice to everybody is stay engaged in the space and make sure that you share what's working and what doesn't work. And also remember, not all businesses are SaaS based. So a lot of the practices that you'll see in the space are very much SaaS based ideas or best practices. And of course, not all businesses are like that. I worked as a VP of customer success for a company called Medrio. It's clinical trial software. That is not SaaS based business. You are either running a clinical trial or you're not. So it's much more project by project. So our bottom line, even though you could look at net retention, really didn't tell us what was going on in the base. So what we really had to do was create models where we could create advocates of people who, when they went somewhere else or when their businesses were acquired, they brought in Medrio with them. And I have to say, in building out an advocacy program, a little bit different than building out that specific customer journey. They're all related, but you have to figure out which ones you need to build first to not only help your customers, but your bottom line. The best practice is if you try to insert them in a business that's maybe not SaaS based or in other things, it just might not work right. The good news is we'll just experiment and then you can share that back with the space of like what works, what doesn't, why, what types of business models, but you have to stay engaged. So I encourage everyone to engage in the space and make sure you're sharing practices across different types of business models if you have them.
This is amazing, Laurel. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Your insights are really, really valuable, and I know our audience is going to enjoy this interview.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I had a lot of fun today.
Same here. So we'll be back with a new episode and a brand new expert soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one. Thank you.